little bit about themes in character design for comic books and illustration mostly. His name is Ray Hick, so give him a little applause.
Thank you. Okay, let's begin. Thank you. Yeah, my name is Ray Hecht, and I'm a writer, and I usually write prose and novels and that sort of thing, but I'm also a big fan of comics and animation, and sometimes I've drawn my own comics and written scripts and things like that, so I'd just like to come to share with you many examples of how to use mythology and other themes in your character design so that you can come up with your own similar ideas inspired by these examples. And yeah, mostly I'm just a fan of these things, so I learned a lot about them, so I'm happy to share. First of all, about mythology, I heard you guys use mythology in this school. How do you use mythological themes in this school?
House
Yeah.
system.
Oh, the houses. So what are the houses based off of?
Greek gods and goddesses.
Yeah, Greek gods and goddesses. What kind of examples? What are the houses? Huh? Yeah, like Apollo. So what is Apollo the god of? What does he represent?
Sun.
Yeah, sun. And it's actually like a very common archetype. Sun gods, like different cultures have them, and lots of different characters in movies and all kinds of stories are like inspired by those ancient stories to tell new ones and create new characters. Any other? Apollo is maybe the best example, but
It is because that's my film.
okay. All right, we support House Apollo here. Okay, well, let's begin. So, themes and character design. So how to use ancient mythological themes and other systems in character design. So some of these themes will be very ancient, and some of them will be based on more modern concepts, you'll see. So the first comic character in Western culture and in American culture is, of course, Superman. He's the most iconic. He's the first superhero. So he is definitely based off these themes. Superman was created in 1938 by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. They were from a Jewish immigrant family, and they used the mythology of their own culture and their personal experiences to create this culture. So even they had a unique perspective as Americans whose parents were Jewish immigrants from Europe to incorporate in this idea, and it was just their culture, but almost all Americans found it very popular.
Does everybody know
Idea.
Superman?
I think most people will know that
Yeah.
everywhere in the world. So Superman, is from the planet Krypton that exploded and then he came to Earth. Very famous story, right? This is actually very similar to the biblical story of Moses. And even if it's not your religion, I think most people in Western culture have heard of this story. And it's the story that Moses was a Hebrew slave in ancient Egypt, and family didn't want him killed, so they sent him as a baby floating in the river, and then he was raised by Egyptians. And then he became a hero to his own people. So this idea of the orphan from another culture. So the Jewish immigrant experience at the turn of the century was a lot about assimilation. They were from a different culture, and then they were trying to fit in to the mainstream American culture. So many people back then, they wanted to be seen as normal Americans. So in a way, in a sense, they had to hide their true identity. And this is just like Clark Kent and the many other superheroes who have a secret identity. So obviously he's Clark Kent most of the time, but he's hiding his true self and his true culture. It's very deeply written into the Jewish culture that his creators came from, actually. Let's talk about villains briefly. I even overheard that you'll have to create some villains soon. So every hero should have a good villain. And a good villain should be the opposite of a hero. This is called a foil in screenwriting and literary criticism. And this is when rivals have opposite traits to balance each other out. So when you have the two people, it can be an antagonist and a protagonist. It can be friends, but they're rivals. And it can very often be the hero and the villain of the story. they have opposite traits, and this gives the audience a sense of balance. So, for example, you have strength versus intellect. Superman's main supervillain is Lex Luthor, and it works because they are opposite. Superman has physical strength and all the superpowers, and Lex Luthor is a normal human, but he uses his brain to fight. So they're inherently going to be opposites and disagree. Yeah. There's a lot of different versions of Lex Luthor, but do you know this character? He's in some of the new movies, you know. Of course, another example is Batman, who fights the Joker. And Batman represents order and intelligence. And the Joker represents chaos and emotion. By being so opposite, they make perfect enemies for each other. So this is probably even more popular than Superman and Lex Luthor these days, is Batman and the Joker. And it's everyone's favorite villain for a reason. They are perfect opposites. And now we're going to talk more about mythology and ancient mythology. So the original DC superheroes were the first popular American comic book characters. They formed a team known, of course, as the Justice League. Do you know these characters? So they're actually very similar to the Olympian Greek god pantheon. And it sinks on a deep level with readers who feel that this super team are godlike. And we talked about Apollo. I think we know most of the main Greek gods. So when you put the team together, Superman corresponds to Zeus, the king of the gods, god of lightning and power. And Batman corresponds to Hades, the lord of the dark underworld. And he's the dark character. Wonder Woman, who, by the way, her origin story also directly references Greek mythology. Her father is Zeus and created by Zeus and all that in the Themyscira Amazons. She corresponds to Hera, the feminine queen, nature. And a few more. Aquaman corresponds to Poseidon, the god of the seas. It's a water theme, very deep theme. And the Flash corresponds to Hermes, the merchant speedster and trickster. So this kind of character is almost the same. Even the original Flash looked like Hermes with the helmet, the 1930s and 40s version. Yeah, so when you put them all together, it connects on a deep level to these cultural themes of Greek mythology. There are also some more modern scientific archetypes we can talk about. There's the team called the Young Justice, or the Justice League's younger counterparts. Superboy, Robin, Impulse is also known as the Kid Flash. So some writers have used the theories of Sigmund Freud's theory of psychoanalysis with psychology. It's also known as a Freudian trio in some of the different stories. So the ego is your most conscious mind, but also there's the superego that deals with morals and learned moral things, and the id is the most unconscious, instinctive natures. So Kid Flash is the id, which is the most primitive, instinctual part of the mind that acts impulsively. Robin is the superego, which is about moral lessons that you learn as part of society. Superboy is the ego, which is the center and balance of the opposing sides of a person's personality. So in a trio, this clicks well. Let's talk about Marvel Comics, which is even more popular than the Justice League these days. It was started by Stan Lee in 1963 mainly, and he also used iconic deep themes. He really knew what he was doing. So, with the most famous character, Spider-Man, you can note that many of his villains are based off of different animals, just like he is. So Spider-Man is based off of a spider. He usually fights someone who's also animal-themed. Animals are universally recognized to have certain character traits across many cultures. So this system often works for people all over the world. So obviously, you say like a lion is strong, or a bat is kind of like dark and evil. So you have Dr. Octopus, the rhino, the lizard, the scorpion, Morbius the living vampire is a bat, Craven the hunter is like a lion, and more. So many of his cast of characters are based off this animal theme. Very basic thing that anybody can do to make up characters. The Marvel Age officially began not with the Avengers, but with the Fantastic Four. They were the first ones. Let's see if you can think about what theme they correspond to. It's an ancient system. It's not god characters, but it's a system. And there's four. Think about it for a second. It is, of course, the four elements of ancient Greece. Water, earth, fire, air. So Mr. Fantastic is water. The Invisible Woman is air. The Thing is earth, and the Human Torch is fire. They work well as a team because they correspond with these things, which almost everybody's heard of. Let's look at them one more time. You can see water, air, she turns invisible if you don't know, fire, earth. Okay. The Fantastic Four were created by the very imaginative Jack Kirby, who's kind of the most important American comic book creator. And along with Stan Lee, they co-created all of Marvel's most popular works and successful works. And he was very much interested in mythology in his stories. For example, this character Thor. It's not even a metaphor, it's just literally the ancient god Thor is a superhero. So you can just do it that directly. But it's an original take on the character. Yeah, and there's also Hercules, he fought, who's a Marvel hero. The supervillain he fights is Loki, the ancient Norse trickster villain. There are ancient Egyptian characters sometimes in these Thor stories as well. So, and here's Loki. Any mythology you can just steal it because it belongs to everybody. It's not like one person owns it. You can also use real life history as an example to tell stories. The X-Men, do you know how they're kind of based off real life history? So the X-Men became popular more in the 1980s, and the authors of it were really leaning on real life historical allegories. And the way that they are is about the theme of racism and discrimination. The X-Men are a metaphor for discrimination, as mutants are a fictional ethnic group who are oppressed. And these stories teach readers about tolerance and human rights. It's not directly true that people with superpowers are some kind of discriminated group, but as a metaphor, it has parallels to the American Civil Rights Movement in the 1950s and 1960s, in which African Americans wanted to have equal rights with the rest of American citizens. This storyline right here is all about how to deal with intolerance, as you can see. Professor X, the peaceful leader of the X-Men, he's often been portrayed as to be based on the peaceful civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr. While his main antagonist, Magneto, has been based on the more militant black rights leader Malcolm X. He's more about fighting back as a leader of his people. He's about peaceful coexistence. And these are some real foils against each other, but it's based off real life history. These are real people. And let's briefly talk about Japanese manga. I think this is probably more popular in Taiwan, right? The One Piece stories are also based off deeper themes. I think this is probably the most popular manga in the world. And it's actually, a lot of the stories retell ancient Japanese history. This is just a fun picture of them dressed as samurai, but they're usually like superpowered pirates who fight on the sea. It's not really something that's supposed to look like ancient Japan and like real history. But the storylines where they fight different kings that are actually based off real shoguns and things like that. Another thing that is utilized in One Piece is the villains known as the Seven Warlords of the Sea correspond to, once again, animals. And the author said he based them off of animals. So he's like a bat and a whale shark and a bear and a flamingo bird and she uses snakes. Yeah, very basic stuff. Just animals have these traits we can all relate to. Lastly, the one that might be the most direct and popular, I think this seems to be the most popular one in Taiwan, right, is Naruto. The author Masashi Kishimoto has said that in his very first Naruto story, it was about the theme of loyalty. And so just an idea like loyalty is a way to tell a story. And obviously, Naruto utilizes Japanese and Asian mythology, which is also very valid, of course. There's the shinobi ninjas, there are fox spirits, there are war gods that people use summoning power to get, and all based off of things that the author didn't directly invent himself, he just used it from ancient mythology of his culture. And that's about it. In summary of using these themes for character design, referencing ancient mythology from any culture from all over the world can delve deep into themes that connect with people. The references might be about gods, might be famous stories and tales, or mythological theories about nature, like the elements or something like that, or chakras or something like that, you know? Consider making two characters who are rivals and they have opposite traits. Then you can think about character traits for more than one character. Even something as simple as basing characters off animals will work well. And also, there's modern psychology and other sciences can also provide inspiration for characters. And lastly, real life history is always valid to use for creating your storytelling ideas. And that's about it. Does anyone have any comments they'd like to share, any questions? Yeah. Do you know of any other stories that might have some examples like these? What kind of popular stories do you like? What kind of,
We kind of had a theme of like legends and stuff when we were doing Inktober. I think we had the word legend, and quite a few of us had similar legend stories.
That's
Yeah,
great.
and I did the same kind of idea. You did, what is it, like the Arthur?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh
like
yeah,
the
King
ancient
Arthur and
legend of King
Camelot is a
Arthur.
good example. What other legends did people come up with when that was a point that people were using?
Oh.
What did you use?
Krampus?
Huh?
Krampus?
Krampus. Oh,
It's like
the
the-
Christmas
yeah.
villain. Yeah. There you go. Very good.
That's
It's like
kind
a
of a good
Germanic
example
story.
of opposite character traits as well, right?
Yeah, Krampus is quite opposite from Santa Claus. You know, they do different. They like celebrate Christmas in opposite ways. They teach kids to behave in opposite ways, right? So there you go, Santa Claus and the Krampus. Anybody else? Okay, I hope that this got you to start thinking about other ideas. There are, of course, a million more examples besides the ones I've used. You can just use this as a starting off point to think about more examples from your favorite stories and how to create your own characters. Okay, thank you.